New York never slept. Its streets roared with the restless energy of millions of souls, each one chasing something: dreams, love, or survival. Amidst this chaos, destiny had chosen to quietly weave together two lives that, until now, had been walking parallel without ever meeting. Ethan Miller was 27, a man carrying both hope and burden. Born to a mechanic father and a nurse mother in Ohio, his life had been grounded in hard work and modesty. When he moved to New York, he carried his parents' sacrifices with him like invisible luggage. His MBA degree was fresh, but the job market wasn't kind. Interviews came and went, rejection letters piled up, and the weight of unpaid bills pressed harder each day. Yet, even in the midst of struggle, Ethan's heart still beat with ambition. He believed that one day, the city would finally notice him. On the other side of the city lived Sophia Carter, 25, the daughter of wealth and privilege. Her father was a highly respected lawyer, her mother a curator of an elegant art gallery that drew the city's elite. Sophia had grown up in marble-floored mansions, attended private schools, and spent summers in Europe. Outwardly, she had everything. Inwardly, she was restless. The glossy parties, the designer gowns, the flawless lifestyle, it all felt like a carefully painted mask. What she longed for was something genuine, raw, and unpolished. That Friday evening, fate played its first card. The skies cracked open with sudden rain, drenching Manhattan in silver sheets. Ethan, after yet another disheartening interview, ducked into a small café near Central Park. He carried no umbrella, only a worn leather briefcase, and his clothes clung to him with the damp weight of disappointment. He ordered a black coffee and sat by the fogged window, staring blankly at the blurred glow of neon lights on the wet streets. Minutes later, the café door chimed again, and in walked Sophia. She had just left her mother's art exhibition, still dressed in a pale blue gown that shimmered softly under the café's dim lights. The rain had tangled her dark hair, and she brushed it back with an elegant, almost careless motion. As her eyes swept across the crowded café, searching for a seat, they fell on Ethan, tired, soaked, yet carrying a quiet strength. There was only one chair left, across from him. For a heartbeat, their gazes locked. The noise of the café dimmed, the rain softened, and the world seemed to hold its breath. Sophia offered a small, polite smile. "Excuse me," she said gently, her voice carrying the softness of someone who wasn't used to asking strangers for space. "Is this seat taken?" Ethan blinked, trying to mask the sudden rush in his chest. He shook his head. "No, it's free. Please sit." As she lowered herself into the chair, the storm outside grew heavier, trapping them both inside this quiet corner of the world. Neither of them knew it yet, but this fleeting encounter, this moment stolen from the rain, was about to set their lives on a course neither family could have predicted. The café was warm, filled with the gentle hum of conversations and the soft clinking of cups. Ethan sat stiffly, unsure how to act in front of the elegant stranger who had just taken the seat across from him. He tried to keep his eyes on his coffee, but the presence of Sophia felt magnetic, pulling his thoughts again and again toward her. He told himself not to stare, yet every time he looked up, she seemed to be watching him too, her expression calm but curious. Sophia folded her hands around her cup of cappuccino, letting the warmth seep into her cold fingers. She studied Ethan quietly. He was different from the men she usually met in her polished social circles. His suit was simple, his tie slightly loose, his hair damp from the rain, yet his eyes carried a sincerity that struck her instantly. It wasn't wealth or charm that drew her attention, it was something raw, something real. She wanted to know who this man was. Breaking the silence, Sophia leaned forward slightly and said, "You look like you've had a long day." Her tone was soft, meant to sound casual, though her heart raced at her own boldness. Ethan gave a small, tired laugh, rubbing the back of his neck. "You could say that. The city has a way of testing people, doesn't it?" His voice carried the weight of exhaustion, but also a quiet resilience. Sophia tilted her head, intrigued. She was used to confident, polished answers, but this honesty felt refreshing. For a moment, they simply listened to the rain pelting against the glass. Then Ethan asked, "And you? Running from the storm too?" Sophia smiled faintly, glancing out the window. "Something like that. I had an art event nearby, but the rain had other plans." She hesitated, then added, "Maybe it was a good thing. Otherwise, I wouldn't have found this place." Her words lingered between them, heavier than she had intended. Ethan caught the hint of something more, and for the first time in months, a genuine smile tugged at his lips. The conversation began to flow more naturally after that. They spoke about the city, its chaos, its beauty, its endless surprises. Ethan admitted how difficult it was to build a life here, while Sophia confessed how, even with everything at her fingertips, she sometimes felt like she was missing something important. It was strange how two people from such different worlds could find a reflection of themselves in each other. The minutes passed unnoticed, as though the rain outside had slowed time just for them. By the time the storm eased into a drizzle, something unspoken had already formed between them. They didn't call it attraction, not yet, but it lingered in their eyes, in the rhythm of their words, and in the comfort of their silences. When Sophia finally stood up to leave, she hesitated as though she didn't want the moment to end. Ethan felt the same. They exchanged a simple smile, but it carried a promise neither of them fully understood. A promise that this was only the beginning. The next morning, Ethan returned to his routine, sending out resumes, preparing for interviews, and keeping himself busy enough to avoid thinking about the uncertainty of his future. Yet, no matter how hard he tried, his mind kept drifting back to the girl in the café. Sophia. The way she smiled, the honesty in her voice, the way she listened as though his words mattered. It was unusual for him to feel so drawn to someone he had just met, but the memory of her lingered like a spark refusing to die out. Sophia, meanwhile, woke in her spacious apartment overlooking the city. Sunlight filtered through tall glass windows, reflecting off the elegant decor her mother had chosen. Yet, despite the beauty around her, her thoughts wandered back to the stranger she had shared coffee with. Ethan seemed so different from the polished men she usually encountered, those who spoke in rehearsed lines and measured charm. He had been tired, vulnerable, yet strong. For the first time in years, she had felt something genuine. Their families, however, lived in two different worlds. Ethan's parents still worked long hours in Ohio, supporting their son's dream from afar with love but little money. They called him often, encouraging him not to give up. To them, success meant stability, a steady job, and a decent life. For Sophia, her family's expectations were much heavier. Her father wanted her to follow in his footsteps, to study law, and to one day take over the family legacy. Her mother envisioned her as the shining star of high society, attending galas, making connections, and marrying someone who could match their wealth. That evening, Sophia sat with her parents at dinner. The table was covered with fine china and delicate wine glasses, but the conversation felt heavy. Her father spoke proudly of a young associate from his law firm, hinting that he would be a suitable match. Sophia forced a polite smile, but her heart was restless. She thought of Ethan, his wet hair, his humble suit, his eyes that carried both struggle and strength. The contrast between the two men couldn't have been greater, and yet she knew which one had truly left a mark on her. Ethan, on the other hand, spent the evening at a modest diner near his apartment, eating a simple meal of scrambled eggs and toast. He thought of Sophia, realizing she likely dined at luxurious tables far beyond his reach. The idea should have discouraged him, but strangely, it didn't. Instead, it made him wonder what had drawn her to him, even for a short time. Perhaps she saw something in him he couldn't see in himself. That thought kept him awake long into the night, staring out at the glowing skyline, wondering if fate would let their paths cross again. And fate, it seemed, was already at work. Two lives so different, two families so far apart, were quietly being pulled closer by a force neither of them could control. Neither Ethan nor Sophia knew it yet, but this was not the end of their story. It was only the fragile beginning of something that would test not just their hearts, but the very worlds they came from. Days passed, and the city moved forward in its usual relentless rhythm. Ethan buried himself in job applications, interviews, and endless waiting, but Sophia remained on his mind like a melody he couldn't forget. He told himself it was foolish. She belonged to a world far beyond his reach. Yet, whenever he closed his eyes, he could still see her leaning across the café table, her voice soft but full of curiosity. That one meeting had shaken something deep inside him, something he hadn't felt in years. Sophia, too, found herself drifting into daydreams at odd moments. During family dinners, at art exhibitions, even when her friends chattered about fashion and parties, her thoughts returned to Ethan. She didn't even know his full story, only fragments from their brief conversation, but those fragments had been enough. There was a rawness in him, a kind of honesty she had never known in the polished men of her circle. And deep down, she hoped their paths might cross again, though she knew fate rarely granted second chances in a city this vast. It was on a quiet Sunday afternoon, just as autumn leaves began to scatter the sidewalks of Central Park, that fate intervened. Ethan had gone for a long walk to clear his thoughts after another failed interview. He carried no destination, only the need to escape the heavy silence of his apartment. Sophia, on the other hand, had convinced herself she needed fresh air after turning down yet another social event her parents had arranged. Wrapped in a light coat, she wandered through the park, lost in her own thoughts. Their eyes met before either of them realized what was happening. Sophia was standing near a fountain, watching the ripples dance across the water. Ethan, passing by, froze when he recognized her profile. His breath caught, disbelief rushing through him. "Sophia?" he said softly, almost afraid she might vanish if he spoke too loudly. She turned, her eyes widening in surprise before breaking into a smile that lit up her face. "Ethan. I can't believe this," she exclaimed, her voice carrying both joy and relief. They walked together, almost naturally, as though the city had quietly reserved this moment for them. They spoke about their week, their routines, their frustrations, and their small joys. Sophia listened as Ethan admitted how hard it was to find stability, and Ethan was surprised when Sophia confessed how suffocating her privileged life could feel. The park, alive with the colors of fall, became their world, shutting out the rest of the city. For hours they strolled side by side, unaware of the time slipping by. By the time the sun dipped low and the air grew chilly, a bond had already formed. It wasn't love, not yet, but it was something undeniable. A connection that felt fragile and powerful all at once. As they parted ways at the park's edge, Sophia hesitated before saying, "Maybe, we could meet again? Not by chance this time." Ethan's heart leapt at her words, and for the first time in months, hope filled his chest. He nodded, smiling in a way that reached his tired eyes. "I'd like that. Very much." The days that followed brought a quiet anticipation neither of them could ignore. Ethan found himself checking his phone more often, waiting for Sophia's message. When it finally came, an invitation to meet at a small bookstore café downtown, his heart raced with a nervous excitement he hadn't felt in years. He spent longer than usual choosing his clothes, not because he wanted to impress her with wealth or style, but because he wanted to feel like he belonged, even just for a little while, in her world. Sophia, on the other hand, kept her plans carefully hidden from her parents. Her mother had already arranged for her to attend a charity gala that evening, but Sophia feigned a headache and slipped away instead. She knew her family would disapprove if they discovered she was spending time with someone like Ethan, someone without money, influence, or a powerful family name. Yet, her heart told her this connection mattered more than any gala or social obligation ever could. At the cafe, their conversation flowed effortlessly, as though they had known each other for years. Ethan spoke about his struggles, about the endless cycle of interviews and the pressure he felt to make his parents proud. Sophia listened intently, her eyes never wavering, as if every word mattered to her. In return, she opened up about the suffocating expectations of her world, the constant demand to be perfect, to marry well, to continue a legacy she didn't choose. For the first time, she felt free to share her fears without judgment. But outside the warm glow of their stolen meetings, the reality of their lives loomed like a shadow. Sophia's father had already begun pressing her about marriage prospects, subtly mentioning the young lawyer he admired so much. Ethan's landlord had given him a final warning about rent, and his bank account was running dangerously low. Both of them knew that the fragile happiness they were building existed in a bubble, one that could burst the moment their families discovered the truth. Still, despite the risks, they couldn't stay away from each other. Every meeting deepened their connection, every conversation tied them closer together. When Ethan looked into Sophia's eyes, he no longer felt like a man on the edge of failure. He felt seen, understood, and worthy. When Sophia sat across from Ethan, she no longer felt like a daughter trapped in a gilded cage. She felt alive, free, and real. They were opposites in almost every way, yet together they created a balance neither had ever known. And so their secret bond grew, fragile but determined. They both knew that if their families discovered the truth, storms would follow. But neither of them cared. For now, they chose to live in the moments they were given, unaware of just how soon their hidden love would be tested by forces far beyond their control. It didn't take long for whispers to begin. Sophia's absence from family gatherings, her sudden excuses to miss events, and the quiet glow on her face whenever she returned home, it all drew her mother's suspicion. One evening, while Sophia was lost in thought at the dinner table, her mother asked casually, "Is there someone new in your life?" Sophia froze, her fork suspended in midair. She forced a smile and shook her head, but inside, her heart raced. For the first time, she realized how fragile her secret truly was. Meanwhile, Ethan faced struggles of his own. His landlord had finally given him an ultimatum: either pay the overdue rent within 2 weeks or move out. The pressure weighed heavily on him, but he kept it hidden from Sophia. He didn't want her to see him as weak or incapable, even though she had only ever shown him kindness. Still, the thought of losing the little stability he had left gnawed at him, making him wonder if he had the right to pull someone like Sophia into his uncertain world. Their meetings, however, remained a sanctuary. At a quiet riverside spot one evening, Sophia confessed how suffocated she felt by her parents' expectations. Ethan listened, his gaze steady, and told her gently, "You don't have to live the life they planned for you. You can choose your own." His words settled deep into her heart, more powerful than anything she had heard before. For the first time, she began to believe she could fight for something different, something truly hers. But fate was cruel. A week later, while Sophia was at a café with Ethan, one of her mother's acquaintances happened to walk in. The woman recognized Sophia instantly, her eyes narrowing as she took in the sight of her sitting with a man who clearly did not belong to her world. By the time Sophia returned home that evening, her parents were already waiting, the tension in the room sharp as glass. "Who is he?" her father demanded, his tone cold and unforgiving. Sophia's silence gave him all the answer he needed. Ethan, too, felt the first sting of reality. The next day, he received a call from his mother in Ohio. She had heard rumors through distant relatives about Sophia's wealthy family. "Ethan," she said gently, "are you sure about this? Their world is not our world. We don't want to see you hurt." Though her words came from love, they cut deep. Ethan knew she was right, at least in part. The gap between his life and Sophia's seemed impossibly wide. And yet, his heart refused to let go. As both families closed in, the fragile bubble of their love began to tremble. What had started as a chance encounter in a rainy café was now on the verge of becoming a battle between love and expectation, freedom and duty, two hearts and the weight of two families. Neither Ethan nor Sophia knew how to win, but both knew one truth: walking away from each other was no longer possible. The confrontation at Sophia's home grew heavier with each passing day. Her father refused to acknowledge Ethan as anything more than a mistake. "He can't give you the life you deserve," he said firmly, his voice filled with pride and authority. "You were born to carry forward our name, not throw it away for someone who doesn't belong." Sophia listened silently, her heart aching. Every word was a blade, but none of them were enough to cut the bond she felt with Ethan. She wanted to shout that love mattered more than wealth, but the weight of her family's gaze kept her voice locked inside. Ethan, too, found himself cornered. His financial struggles worsened, and with eviction looming, he questioned whether he had the strength to keep Sophia by his side. At night, lying awake in his dimly lit apartment, he thought of her world of luxury and wondered if he was being selfish to keep holding on. Yet every time he remembered her smile, her laughter, the way she listened to him as if he mattered, he knew that letting go would break him far more than poverty ever could. When they met again, in the quiet shelter of Central Park where their second meeting had begun, Sophia's eyes brimmed with tears. "They don't understand," she whispered, her hands trembling in his. "They see you as less, when to me you are everything." Ethan pulled her close, resting his forehead against hers. "We don't need them to understand," he said softly. "We only need to know what's in our hearts. If we give up now, we'll regret it for the rest of our lives." His words steadied her, and in that moment, their resolve deepened. But resolve wasn't enough to silence the storm. Sophia's father forbade her from seeing Ethan again, going as far as assigning drivers to monitor her movements. Her mother pleaded with her, insisting she would ruin her future. Sophia felt like a prisoner in her own home, trapped between the walls of love and duty. Ethan, too, faced pressure from his family, who urged him to think practically, to find someone who shared his world instead of fighting an impossible battle. Yet, the thought of giving up on Sophia felt like betrayal, not just to her, but to himself. One evening, when the city lights shimmered against the Hudson River, Sophia slipped away and found Ethan waiting for her, as though he had known she would come. They stood there in silence, the weight of their families pressing down on them, the future uncertain and frightening. But when Ethan took her hand and whispered, "No matter what happens, I choose you," Sophia knew her decision was already made. She looked into his eyes, her voice steady for the first time. "Then I choose you too. Even if the world turns against us." In that moment, the noise of the city faded, and only their hearts remained. The road ahead would be filled with obstacles, perhaps even heartbreak. But they had chosen love over fear, truth over expectation. And sometimes, that choice alone was enough to change everything. The weeks that followed tested them in ways they never expected. Messages were read in secret, meetings were brief and stolen, and every moment carried the risk of discovery. Yet, every hardship only strengthened their bond. Ethan's quiet resilience and unwavering honesty inspired Sophia to fight for her own happiness, while Sophia's courage and determination reminded Ethan that love was worth every struggle. Finally, one evening, Sophia decided to confront her parents. She sat them down, her voice calm but firm. "I am in love with Ethan," she said, looking them in the eyes. "I know he isn't rich, I know he isn't what you imagined, but he is honest, kind, and everything I need. I cannot live a life dictated by fear or expectation." Her parents were silent, stunned by her conviction. For the first time, they saw the depth of her feelings, the strength of her heart. Ethan, too, had taken a bold step. He secured a small but promising position in a financial firm that recognized his talent and potential. It wasn't a massive salary, but it was stability, and it allowed him to stand tall in front of Sophia's family. When he finally met them formally, he spoke not just as a suitor, but as a man determined to prove that love and commitment could bridge any gap. Slowly, hesitation turned to reluctant respect. Months passed, and the barriers between their worlds began to soften. Sophia's parents realized that their daughter's happiness mattered more than societal expectations, and Ethan's family celebrated the promise of a bright future for both of them. The city that had first brought them together in a rain-soaked café now witnessed their love grow, bloom, and thrive amidst the chaos of life. On a crisp autumn evening, surrounded by friends and family, Ethan and Sophia stood hand in hand beneath a canopy of golden leaves. The city lights sparkled around them, echoing the journey they had taken, from a chance encounter to a love that defied odds, expectations, and fear. Their families, once divided by status and pride, now shared in their joy, witnessing a love that had conquered every obstacle. And as they looked into each other's eyes, Ethan whispered, "We did it. Together." Sophia smiled, her heart full, knowing that every challenge had led them to this moment. In a city of millions, among endless chaos and fleeting connections, they had found something rare, something eternal, each other. Their story was proof that love, when chosen bravely and fiercely, could rewrite destinies and unite worlds.